Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Um, I feel kind of bad leaving that last video up alone for a month. I have actually been giving money to other Gazans that aren't just specific. Uh, just keep testing my faith as I see no end in sight to the conflict, and I march forward with giving and desperately trying to get more income in and just keep giving. Uh, so that is part of the test. And another part of the test is this general question of theodicy. This is the general issue of suffering and how many people are led to atheism by this dynamic. Why would God allow animal suffering? There's so much, most animals don't live great lives, they're cold, etc. Uh, there's no religious contraindication against factory farming, billions of lives a year just churning through a literal meat grinder, etc. And there's human famine and war. And then in Islam, of course, the answer is that this is all a test. That, and if you take it at a more satisfying mystical level of what that means, is that Allah was a hidden treasure yearning to be known and created the world in order to be known. So, in my technical elucidation of that, there's a non-commutative nature of Wajad al-Wujud, and the universe is a ZK proof of God. So you'll never apprehend the total data of God because it's infinite, but you can apprehend the low degree testing of the polynomial that is carved into the contours of our immanent reality, and in this way come to wisdom. So this is generally how I approach it. And then when I contemplate as I study religion, and for the Christians, it's like the Gospel of John, irrespective of its provenance as being legitimately from an eyewitness. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's the drifting byproduct with some edits of a 9-year-old witness, the beloved disciple, who's the sort of Ibn Abbas of that time, and was a child, the young John, and then grows up in the wake of Paulinism and in the company of Greco-Roman early believers, and then is aware of predecessor gospels, and then writes his sort of capstone last word, and that this is actually the only one written by an eyewitness. So Matthew would be through a layer of Ebionite successions and editings forthwith. Luke might be post Marcion, might be the last one. Mark might be the earliest. This is the classical one. I've been toying with ideas that Mark is post John, that John is actually the earliest, but it does seem to have the structural template of the synoptics. That's your classical New Testament scholarship. And then the thing is, the real Islamic dilemma is that the Ahmed prophecy, which Christians are being told to look up in their scriptures, so for whatever is good of it, for the Jews, it would be in Deuteronomy, I believe. Maybe it's 16. No, maybe it's 20 something. I don't recall off the top of my head. But there's the prophet who will speak the specific words of God that you'll have to obey in Deuteronomy. And what he says is basically, you guys have been out of line. You should stick to the Torah. So that's in my understanding of the Quran. And then for Christians, it's the Ahmed prophecy of Jesus, salawatu alayhi wasallam, and that this is the John 16 paraclete, not the John 14 paraclete, which is the diffuse Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit's already been available. It's not coming. It's already come. It's come to the various heroes and prophets of the Tanakh and so on. So this is actually a specific figure. This would be the Prophet Muhammad, salawatu alayhi wasallam, in the this is the only way that the Quran makes sense. So this is the true Islamic dilemma, is that the Quran hooks itself into the most spicy, from a Quranic point of view, gospel. If you're just going off of Mark 10 and 12, why do you call me good? Only God is good. And oh, yeah, Israel, reiterating the Shema, your Lord is one, and also to love thy neighbor with all thy heart. And he's just universalizing that as his role as the Messiah, among other things. But generally, that's what it means for Israel to be a light unto the nations. And what is the difference between the erudite politeness of Platonic civilization, which is sort of westernized Hindu civilization and Egyptian mysteries mixed in, and Christian morality? It's that you have this sort of leftism, not in the sense of Marx's labor theory of value, which isn't correct economic theory, but as a disingenuous slight of the Excel spreadsheet of his model to buttress his pro labor position, but ultimately pro labor as far as just the market dynamic of syndicates repricing labor upwards, and then you got the middle class. That did work, but you didn't need the labor theory of value to do that negotiation. You just negotiate as you do based on reality and based on what information you have and so on, what leverage you have. And this is sort of the story of the left in a more sane sense, as it manifested what we now call the Overton window of liberal versus conservative. A lot of these people who are voting in that modern framework are descendants of people who earned money in part because of the 40-hour work week and health benefits and the GI Bill and all of these sorts of post FDR things. And then that's standing on almost 2 millennia of public hospitals and the scribal work of monks and so on. And obviously, the Islamic world did its part as well in a big way. They carried a lot of information in the intervening so-called Dark Ages, which is correspond in Europe, which corresponds with the Islamic Golden Age. So this is how I come to understand what is the real difference between a sort of inductive Platonist morality, which like spiritual but not religious people follow, and a lot of atheists and agnostics follow, and so on. The other one being about the regulation of sexuality. Don't just go to the party and take the substances and hey, I like you gotta get married, but then you could try to have a very good energy flow between the spouses that'll strengthen the marriage, which is more covered in these other traditions. You don't really get a lot of that sort of Kama Sutra stuff in the prophetic tradition. A little bit, it's alluded to. It's good to do foreplay. Ghazali talks about that. We don't really have like a Sufi Kama Sutra book, which is unfortunate. We do have some nice love poetry and whatnot, so there's something there. But these would be the main differences from your just inductive morality. This would be what you get from the prophetic revelation. But that's kind of narrow. That's your cellular family unit, right? But at the wider civilizational scale, things like public hospitals, charity drives in disasters and famines and so on, this really is the message of Christ, and this really is the message of the Quran. Not entirely. There's a lot of there's a lot of stern stuff. So okay, so far so good. And then from this actually we get a compounding. There's a real material benefit, like Surah Asr, that we implore towards the good and towards perseverance, and we believe in God and do good deeds. The four tenets. These actually have a material outcome, and the Mutazili viewpoint would elaborate that. But you also get it from like neo Asherite, like Tim Winter type people, that there's actually a great de-superstitionization, an elucidation of reason, and these had material benefits. And then you would have the critiques that you had medieval Catholicism or medieval Sunni Islam, the Iqta system or feudalism is sort of the same idea. And you got the stagnation, and then we got the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution. And so as a sort of progressive, to some extent, modern, but not modernist believer, you have to synthesize that. Okay, so far so good, right? So this all kind of makes sense. This is what got me back into religion about 3 years ago and some months. This is how I came to be able to believe again. And I came to appreciate that with great gratitude, the hand of God in history. So I am not a Quranist because the Quran says not to separate God and his messenger. And the Wati Rasul stuff that the Sunnis always bring up on these, like Brother Muhammad's open forums and so on, it's repeated enough. It seems obvious. It's an easy go-to for the pro hadith perspective, but it doesn't necessarily mean those hadiths. So that's why we get to the Shia perspective or the Abadi perspective. Is no, it's just these hadith, or it's like these hadith, including these Imami hadith. And then so we have Hadir, and then Ali designated after he was dying of poison, which really make more sense to do it with a will, so you don't have to just be in a near death situation to do the Nas. But okay, he designates Hassan, and then Hassan gets poisoned by his wife, who was bribed by Muawiyah, who's a great briber. And then he designates his brother. And then this is where it gets frit because his brother died in a big battle. So there wasn't a clean, oh, I've been hit. Let me tell you now who's the successor with Hussein, alayhi salam. Alayhim salam to all of these wonderful souls. And so it is said that he designated Zayn, who's the fourth Imam of the Twelvers in the mainline Shiism, before he went off to battle. Well, that's a little bit different. That's a little bit of a different pattern. Usually, perhaps with poor planning, these other designations happened in these deathbed windows of time that you don't always get when one dies. You might die in a car accident, for example. This was Karbala was the great car accident of history. And then you've got other contentions. So the thing with the Zaidi one is that he was quite a bit later, so there was like an intervening generation. And then with the Haisani Shia, you have Muhammad ibn Ali al Hanafiya, who was not a Fatimid. He was the son of a woman of the al Hanafiya tribe. This was the tribe that essentially initiated the Ridda Wars, not because they were like, oh, we don't believe in all of this stuff. It wasn't actual Ridda. It was simply that they were like, hey, in our interpretation, it seems like the Quran is saying we should be giving sadiqat and zakat to our poor, and these are Bedouins. These are people from the Najd, so they didn't have trade routes. They didn't have so much in the way of moisture trapment in the topology of they're in the desert, so they didn't have like date plantations. These are poor people, so these people really need the sadaqah. And Abu Bakr wasn't having it. He wanted that money, so we're going to have to start killing some of you and I'll fight you. And then eventually they okay, better than being wiped out. We'll pay you some money. And their revenge was in this subsequent marriage of Ali, alayhi salam, with this woman of the tribe who then birthed Muhammad, alayhi salam. Why not? Let's go with it. Let's be Hassani today. And then his son, so he was the first Mahdi, according to the legend. He was cited as the inspiration for an uprising in Iraq of 10 or 20,000 soldiers against the Umayyads, which failed. You don't always win when you do a revolution. That's part of the risk. And then his son, Abu Hashim, was the teacher of Wasal ibn Atta, the founder of the Mutazili school of Akida. This was really before madhabs were, I suppose they imported a lot of Ahurai, Hanafi, fiqh opinions in that time frame. And then his son, or his cousin, I think it was his nephew, who he designated, this is not a strict assumed firstborn type thing like with monarchy. It's you have to actually designate the Nas. He designated his nephew, and then his nephew was like, you know what? That was Al Abbasi of the Abbasids. Okay, so now we've got this other Ibn Abbas thread of lineage mixed in with the cousins. So this is where cousin marriage really paid off big back then, right? And as one did in Europe and so on with with royal marriage. And that's how we got the Abbasids. and the Abbasids were kind of naughty. But it was better than the Umayyads, right? So that was the premise: is that actually we have this blood of Fatima, and we got Ibn Abbas, so we're the Abbasids, but like we actually have, or no, maybe it wasn't Fatima. We got the blood of Ali. Oh, that's okay. We're Alids. We're not Fatimids. We're Alids. That's pretty good. And so the Shia supported the Abbasids at first, right? And the Hawarij were pretty much extinct by this time, but their quietist successors, the Ibadis, who had gone south to Oman, they were like, hey, these people maybe aren't like a bunch of munafiqs. We could talk to them. And this is where they started to taqlid on hadith, and they started to develop their hadith corpuses, which isn't to say they were pure Quranists as Hawarij. You have Ikrimah citing Ali, citing the Prophet with the apostasy thing. And that was their basis for doing their terrorism. So that was a pretty important hadith for them to include. So they were not pure Quranists. And this is why the question of why weren't there these early Quranists? Well, there were the Mutazili and there were the Hawarij. Yeah, but not exactly, right? And keep in mind that the Hawarij were Shi'at Ali before they said, actually, he's not passing our purity test. Only Allah can judge, and we're going to, do the right thing from our interpretation of the Quran and wage war against him, since he made this deal with Muawiyah, and who I'm not going to curse him, but I'm not going to say anything nice. And so in the time of Abu Hanifa, there were Murjites who were basically like, hey guys, don't boycott Starbucks. We need the business kind of people. But at least they were like non-sectarian. They weren't trying to attack for everyone. Then on the flip side, you have the sort of the proto-Quranists who weren't fully Quranists, the Hawarij, who are like, that's shirk. You're not a Muslim. You're a mushrik. Everyone's a mushrik except us. So we're gonna fight you all. Kind of, okay, guys. Okay, go off into the corner. And then you had more in the middle, although the Murjites were surely the majority, right? They got killed less often, so that was convenient for their numbers. And then you had the Shia, right? And at this time, there was no 12 or Shia. There was just kind of like, okay, Ali was it. And then you had the Mutazili, and the Mutazili were kind of Shia influenced, right? Wasil ibn Ada studied under a Hassani Imam, if you want to take it that far. And so it made me wonder the way that the Abbasid caliphs commissioned the fabrication of the Musnad Zayd to turn the Zaydis into al-Shafi type people. The quote in Musnad Zayd that's put on the lips of Imam Ali alayhi salam, that there's four sources of jurisprudence: the Quran, the Sunnah, the Ijma, and the scholars, and the Qiyas, is like, this was not how things worked. This was an 820 Imam al-Shafi. Oh, I don't want to call him an Imam. Al-Shafi's the Risala 820. This was the key idea of the Risala. This so-called invention of usul al-fiqh. But prior to that, the way usul al-fiqh was practiced is that it's the Quran, the Sunnah, the amal of the people, and rai, or opinion, which involves qiyas, syllogistic reasoning, but also more kinds of reasoning. By the way, there's an induction as well as deduction, right? So induction was on the table in the time of Abu Hanifa. And this is why al-Shafi says, well, we disregard from these places the acceptance of music in Medina, by the way, the marrying without consent or something in this place and that place, but then this is how we curate this all together. And this was in the time of upgrading hadiths of companions and just saying, yeah, actually, like they said it, we can trust them. It wasn't like we have to trust them. That was more the Mamluk dynasty that came later. But that they basically, this is a prophetic hadith, so we should take it like more seriously. It's not just some guy's opinion. When it may well have been, right? And then so the Musnad Zaid was a psyop to turn these former revolutionaries into a bunch of Murjites, essentially. And then to the effect that modern Sunnis, when they're trying to be ecumenical and say, well, the Shia aren't so bad, they go, and the Zaydis, are they even really Shia? Like, the Zaydis are fine, right? It's because of this. And then with the Twelvers, this concept of our guy didn't win this struggle against the ruling elite, but it's okay. He went off into occultation, and he'll come back at the end of time as the hour approaches as the Mahdi. This was originally attributed to Muhammad ibn Ali al-Hanafiya, the Kaisani. This was not invented as after the unfortunate, untimely death of the young, uh, Ibn al-Askari. Okay, and so what this did to the Twelvers is it, or really to the Jafari line at the time. They weren't Twelvers yet because they had to get a few more guys in before they could count to 12. But after that was done, and then they cooked up this, they reheated this older idea and attributed it to the young lad. You effectively turn these potential revolutionaries of the Jafari lineage into Murjites. You go, well, it's eschatological pacifism. So you say, well, we really shouldn't fight these guys until the Mahdi returns, because where's our Imam? He's in occultation. So let's just kind of keep the tradition alive. And maybe we start doing usul al-fiqh ourselves, and we adapt the Mutazili Aqidah, right? Because that's pretty good. Okay. And then you had the Ismailis. So the Ismailis are more promising, but ultimately, I found as I left in protest from the Batini Shia group chat, from Balam's curses at me I asked, why haven't the Aga Khans 4 or 5 said anything at all, not one thing, not a peep about Gaza. They haven't said anything. I'm not saying you gotta go to work, fellas. Just I mean, the popes can do it. Okay, you got a cardinal reading off the names of all these kids. Just say, hey, we think it's bad that this is happening, and we pray for everyone. I mean, hope, thoughts and prayers. He didn't even send thoughts and prayers. And Balam, oh, you're a Zahiri brain. And I'm not upholding this Sunni thing that Umar conquered the place, so we have to like sacrifice these people for the sake of a building that came up in his reign. Because I don't care that much about Umar. I don't curse him. I don't disregard his narrations. I don't accept his fiqh, and I definitely don't accept this idea that we shouldn't help these people. I think that obviously the Muslim duty is to intervene on their behalf, but they just don't have the military power. Maybe Turkey does, and kind of Egypt, and then you got Pakistan. They got nukes. So now we're going to get into like a nuclear standoff ultimately with Israel, and then they're going to be bombing our water plants and our power plants, and it's going to be Gaza times 10 times 20. It's going to be more millions of people in this sphere of suffering. Well, I don't necessarily think that's good either. So if they're not going to do that, I think at the very least, instead of having Hamas over for tea and kind of upholding their selfish delineation and delaying of surrender or any kind of deal, and then they came too little too late. Now ultimately it's Israel's fault for not accepting the truce this week and for pushing ahead and killing more innocent people in the process and continuing to starve them. But Hamas has some blame. They've not been good stewards of their people. They have a fiqh responsibility as well that they have been negligent in, and they are not legitimate leaders. But whatever. Even so, having them over for tea, okay. Now what? We're gonna send sternly worded press releases. No, Erdogan, the so-called Islamist, the so-called traditional guy, should be sending the Navy in and saying, "Hey, we are going to enforce a path through these international waters that you do not have a sovereign claim to under international law, and we are going to set up a pier, and we are going to, um, distribute lots of pallets to the onto the beach. And at least that way, people are going to swim the beach, but it's more surface area. And we're going to be, doing so along with Jordan, doing these little airdrops and the UN, whatever UN trucks you've been letting in. It's not enough. It's like 80 a day, maybe should be 300, 400 to get stabilized things. But the trucks are getting swarmed. Okay, and then you got the Gaza Foundation. People are getting you got Amal, sweet Amal, shot in the eye. They didn't even get a box, But okay, we're going to do all these things, and we're going to add this to the table. And if you don't let us, then we will legally fight you in this international waters to uphold the UN's rules of the sea and so on. Not to say to go to war, and it might escalate to that, but you got to be willing to do that. And then they're gonna like call their bluff because that like they've got a real military. This isn't Giuliani's bucket of guys that won't even fight, or the Hezbollah, and there's like no air force of the Lebanese state, or what have you, right? And they're much stronger than the Egyptian military, which might actually be able to put up a fuss against Israel and get a lot of people killed on both sides and lose, but but fight for a while, put up a good fight. But the Turkish military really has power. So anyway, but that's his problem on Judgment Day. It's not my problem. I've been bleeding financially, so I've been doing my part, at least to what extent I have to give. And inshallah, we'll be able to continue to give in greater quantity and fulfill the pledges I've made in dua. So why is Islam so muddy? It's just so muddy. How do you do dawah? You have to go, no, he wasn't a pedophile. You have to, no, actually, no, those aren't those hadith that make the prophet look like a maniac. Those are false. But what about the Shia? The Shia are good. No, but they're Iran. Why does Iran kill these people? Oh, well, there were these Buyid era hadiths. The Buyids needed to look legitimate to consolidate power. It's just so much. It's like I Love Lucy, and the Christian guy or the atheist guy is Ricky Ricardo, and he's like, "You got a lot of explaining to do," and you're like, ugh. And this is the great challenge. And as I was talking about with the Gospel of John, you've got a lot of theopathic statements in the Gospel of John that you can read differently as Unitarians do from the original Greek. The Father and the I are one, gender neutral in in allegiance, essentially in spirit. This is not a statement of literal identity. If it was like the Father and I are one entity, one him, in other words, that would be more like the Trinitarian thing, right? So this is how the Unitarians read it, and I guess this is how Islam makes sense: is that you can unstaple some like John 14 and 13, but you got to reread some of these things, and if you did, then can't these people be forgiven for reading it like the Trinity doesn't make sense, but the theopathic statements in John are very weird because there's Unitarian sounding statements in John, and then there are these sort of Middle Platonism, I am him before Abraham was, I am, this kind of stuff. And so you have to go, well, but Platonism has this, and that's actually it's Hinduism, right? Well, the God is so big, so infinite that you have these like lesser emanations, but they're like interlinked, and it's now most of the church fathers were subordinationists, so this was a more reasonable interpretation, keeping in line with the Shema, right? Keeping in line with monotheism, the first commandment, but it's tough. And then with Islam, it's like, oh, okay, so Islam is true, but then why are these Muslims like like this. Yeah, well, things happened. So what happened is that the line of Hassani Imams invented Sunnism, and they invented Zaydiism and Twelverism. They invent, and the Mutazili got carved up like a mythic creator titan, and the head got welded onto the goat body of Atharism and became Ashariya, and the wings got welded on to the Akida of Al Jam and the Murjites and became Maturidi, and the hooves got welded on to the bird's like body uh, of Shiism and became Ithna Ashari, the 12er school. And I mean, they're basically all Mutazili except for the Abadis, who are a big other body part of the Ashari Frankenstein, and who are more, they're classical theists. They're not anthropomorphic. So they're not reading the Quran totally literally. They are applying reason, but they end up with a pretty stern takeaway. They don't have this ecclesial component. And then if you listen to like Brother Muhammad talk Akida, he kind of has a smattering of like Abadi and what's the word, apophatic, radically apophatic, which is fine, I guess. But not Neoplatonic. But okay, so sure, but like okay, so there's room outside of the Mutazili school to come at like non-Mujassima Akidas. Okay, I'm not trying to say that, but certainly the Mutazili school was extremely influential, and it's not just because thinking good has legs, because we're humans and we have brains and we tend to think, and we get a little dopamine out of it. I mean, that's certainly part of it too. And despite the Athari thing ultimately crystallizing and infecting Sunnism, thinking prevails still, and this is the best part of Sunnism, is you have this idea of like, well, if you study and you learn the Makasim of the Sharia, and then Usul al-Fiqh is really this very subtle legal jurisprudence reasoning. Oh, cool. Okay, I like that. I like Tim Winter. He does some good lecture. I don't agree with everything he says, but I like his overall vibe. I don't think that's bad. Most people were like him in the Ahl Sunnah. That would be great. So but theologically, it's the theodicy of the mind that Allah would, rather than preserving, he preserved the 12, he preserved our particular sect, and this is the right one, is that he preserved. It's like the mayor of Chicago said in the 60s when there were riots at the DNC. I don't remember the guy's name. I don't think his name is worth remembering, but he said the policeman is not there to prevent, what was it? What did he say? It was something like, the policeman is not there to prevent disorder. The policeman is there to preserve disorder. So it was a misspeak. He was trying to say to preserve order. He's not there to like stop, he can't prevent people from rioting, but what he can do is preserve order. That's what he was trying to say. But it's a classic misspeak, because it really, from a subversive perspective, it highlights the main anti-establishment critique, that the police are really there. It's like anarcho-tyranny at some level. They're there to enforce the injustice. They're there to enforce the status quo. Or as Police Chief Wiggum said in an episode of The Simpsons, the police are powerless to help you, but we're not powerless to punish you. And this is, unfortunately, but this is our lot in life. We must confront that Allah has created a test for us, in which Wati Rasul passed to Ali, passed to his son, passed to his other son, passed to his third son. So that actually kind of it makes a certain amount of sense. Why are we gear shifting into a Husseini lineage suddenly? Why not the third son? And then from that lineage, they Abu Hashim was pretty cool because he taught Wasil ibn Ata these beautiful theological things about the divine unity of the essential justice of Allah. That this is really built into reality, and obviously that Allah is beyond, having hands and all this sort of Allah has influence, so with his own hands, quote unquote, stuff like that. So be a thinking person, please, as the Quran demands, the Fakarun. But then the Abbasids ultimately engineered everything that's wrong with Islam. The elaboration of Murjiite quietist acceptance of injustice with a little bit of Shiism, but Imam Ali, okay. So we're not Nawasib anymore. We're not Nasibis. We don't curse we're nice about the Ahlul Bayt. We pay them lip service. And then you blend in the Mutazili reasoning, so people are kind of like, yeah, no, this is reasonable. And then you blend in maybe a little bit of the Hawariji strict monotheism. So we're not like those Shia that they like the Imams too much, and you just create this product that everyone's happy with, except for some of these other people. So for them, what we're going to do is we're going to give them these subversions that will corrupt them essentially, and keep them occupied and distracted. It's like the Matrix. And the first Matrix was a perfect place where everyone was happy and people couldn't accept the program. This wasn't the case historically with the followers of the Quran, but we had to create a world of suffering in order to get people to accept the program, because that's all that human nature can really stomach. And I don't know, maybe there's some wisdom in this, and maybe this is how Allah intended it to be. And that was the purpose of the Imam. So Balaam's idea as an Ishmaeli, and is very radical and kufri, I think, and a little bit shirky as well. Somehow he combines them. Is that his Imams, the Ishmaeli Imams, have been masterminding everything. And in this Neoplatonic sense, God, instead of just kind of acting directly and stamping everything, acts through these people who are making it up as they go, kind of. But like that's their prerogative, because somehow God is like affirmed in his like infinite transcendentalist sort of Platonist concept of being beyond it all, is like, yeah, sure, the Imams can take care of it. And then they have these layers of taqiyya, and we're all in this cosmic theater, whether we like it or not. And what I'm suggesting is, no, like I believe in the Quran, and so I wouldn't put such and such happenstance of what some Imams say over the Quran, right? But, and this is why I reject all these sects as well. But if the actual lineage of the Shia Imams were the Abbasids, then they really did a lot of evil, and they did so much evil that they completely buried real Islam from every angle. Even when you jump out of the box, you're in another box, and you got to jump out of that box, and then you're in another box. And they did such a good job of mimetically engineering this religion into being unrecognizable, except for those who do deep study of it and try to dig up what really went on, and don't allow themselves to be distracted by the lure of sinking into a particular orthodoxy. Now, of course, maybe I haven't truly transcended that. Maybe this is that. Maybe I'm just in the fifth box, and I'm like, oh wow, this box is great, subhanallah. Yeah. So I mean, basically, God is just a brilliant writer, like I'm trying to be grateful about this, and it's a lot to explain. You don't necessarily have to couch it in some kind of initiatic, esoteric thing, because it's not that crazy. You can put it on the internet as I'm doing now. Allah intended for this to be kind of tough, and Allah intended for there to be a difficulty curve in which the people who can figure things out become more and morally responsible. And this is the unfortunate position that we are finding ourselves in this very moment. And don't the birds sound lovely? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.